Hello students, welcome to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. Today I am going to deliver a talk on disaster, its concepts, different types. It is basically an introductory lecture in which I am going to discuss these all issues related to disasters. This main objective of this lecture is to have a basic understanding of various concepts used in disaster such as risk, vulnerability. Apart from the terminology, the lecture also tries to explain various types of disaster. Disasters are as old as human history, but the dramatic increase and the damage caused by them in the recent past have become a cause of national and international concern. And that is the reason that today we are going to discuss about disaster. Apart from all these things, let me convince you by citing few quantitative data related to disaster. In India, 59% of the landmass is susceptible to seismic hazard. 5% of the total geographical area is prone to flood. 8% of the total landmass is prone to cyclone. 70% of the total cultivable area is vulnerable to drought. Apart from this, hilly regions are vulnerable to avalanches, landslides and different type of cloudburst. You might have seen in news channels often this news related to Uttarakhand, which was very much in the news, which has badly impacted not only those who were residing in the area, but also the tourists which went there to visit Uttarakhand. We have seen the huge loss to life, property and infrastructure a disaster can cause, but let us understand first, what is disaster? So, a disaster can be defined as a serious disruption in the functioning of the community or a society causing widespread material, economic, social or environmental losses which exceed the ability of the affected society to cope using its own resources. So, what you have to understand is that the society reaches up to a level of destruction where the society is unable to cope up with the sudden damage which has taken place. So, a disaster is a result from the combination of hazards, vulnerability and insufficient capacity or measures to reduce the potential chance of risk. According to World Health Organization, disaster can be defined as, quote, any occurrence that causes damage, ecological disruption, loss of human life or deterioration of health and health service on a scale sufficient to warrant an extraordinary response from the outside the affected the community of an area can be defined as a disaster. So, this was all about what is a definition of disaster. Now, often students they get confused between hazard and disaster. You should understand the basic difference between a hazard and a disaster. Any hazard such as flood, earthquake or cyclone which is triggering event along with greater vulnerability, inadequate access to resources, sick and old people, lack of awareness etc. would lead to disaster causing greater loss to life and property. I will cite an example. An earthquake is an uninhabited desert cannot be considered as disaster, no matter how strong the earthquake intensity is. So, now with citing this example you can understand if the same intensity of earthquakes takes place in a settlement area, that will create great damage to the living being as well as the infrastructure. Same intensity of disaster if it is taking place in an uninhabited area, that will not considered as a disaster. So, that is a difference between hazard and a disaster. An earthquake is a disaster only when it affects people, their properties and activities. That is a basic thing which you need to understand. The disaster occurs only when hazards and vulnerability meet. There are two things which you have to understand. It is also to be noted that with greater capacity of the individual, community and environment to face these disasters, the impact of disaster reduces. So, if we talk about that what are the major components, we can categorize hazards, vulnerability and capacity, a capacity with suitable examples to have the basic understanding of disaster of a particular region. Now, if we try to figure out the factors related to disaster, there can be host factors such as age, immunization status, degree of mobility, emotional stability associated with that area, because generally what happens, people do not like to migrate to other place even if they are knowing that yes, there is a potentiality of any hazard taking place in that area, and they continue to stay in that area. Because of that reason, the hazard converts into a disaster because it causes a great damage to the human being who were native of that particular place. So, this is called as a host factor. Another thing is environmental factors. Environmental factors such as physical factor, chemical factor, biological factor, social factor, psychological factors. These factors are considered as environmental factors. So, now after explaining that three basic concepts or definitions, which again I will explain, and the factors related to disaster, let me also discuss about the characteristics of disaster. So, now one catchword which you might have understood till now was the intensity of the disaster and in which area it is going to take place, how badly it is going to impact the human being or the infrastructure of that particular region. If you understood by now these things, then you will understand that what are the characteristics of a disaster, which components we can take into consideration. These factors are size and scope of the disaster, the unpredictability, how unpredictable any disaster is in a particular area. If it is predictable, there is a chance to cope up with disaster. That is what is being narrated in my previous discussion, that if human beings are capable of combating with a disaster, again that it can reduce to a hazard. But if it is unpredictable in nature, then it becomes a disaster. Its speed, its urgency and threat. So, these are the characteristics of a disaster that takes place. Now, what can be the disruptive factors of disaster? What will happen once a disaster took place in an area? Definitely, it is the death and destruction. It is the loss of basic amenities. It's the disruption of emergency service that is taking place. It's the destruction of road and mode of communication. You might have seen that every year in Bihar and in other states, India is facing, mainly northern India, India is facing flood. Recently, one example from Bettiah district came where the communication was completely lost in several villages. It was because of the flood that happened in that area. That was a hazard, but it converted into a disaster because of the death and destruction which took place, because of the loss of communication, because of the loss of emergency services in that particular area. So, it is not only one example, but every year you can witness many examples from many regions of the country where a hazard convert into a disaster because of the disruptive factors. And yes, as I said, there can be natural factors, there can be anthropogenic factors also. So, disorganization in response service, that is considered as an anthropogenic factor to increase the impact, the negative impact of a disaster in an area. That is also very important, and that is why in the beginning when I was defining disaster management by WHO, I emphasized even quantitative data also. I showed you that in developing countries, disaster is more dangerous compared to developed countries. It is because of this factor, because in developed country the disorganization in responsive services is less. compared to developing countries because of lack of infrastructure, because of the administrative response, because of the coordination among the citizens who are residing and the official who are working in that area. And that is why role of early warning system, role of communication, role of even citizens response, that is also very important. It's not only that government is playing an important role, but it also that how citizens are reacting to the information which is being provided to them to combat the disaster. So, after discussing different traits of disaster, different features related to it, let us understand the types of disaster. A disaster, as I mentioned, it can be natural disaster, it can be man-made or technological disaster, it can also shape like mix of both. So, when it comes to natural disaster, these are categorized further as a geological disaster, as a hydrological disaster, as a meteorological disaster, as a biological disaster. COVID is a big example of such things, and as a space disaster. We say that recently the incident which has happened in Ahmedabad, that is a kind of disaster that suddenly took place because people were not aware of what is happening. It happened within a minute. So, these are considered, this will be categorized into man-made or technological disaster. Under this, the categories are environmental degradation such as pollution, then terrorism, that is also kind of disaster, and different types of accidents. When it comes to different types of accidents, road accidents, if you see the number of increase in the road accident, the percentage of increase in road accident, that is enormous compared to previous years. So, again I would specify that the natural disaster can again be categorized into major natural disaster and minor natural disaster. The major natural disasters are flood, cyclone, drought or earthquake, whereas minor disasters, natural disasters are cold wave, thunderstorm, heat wave, mudslides and a storm. But it all depends upon the minor natural disaster, that may be less in intensity, but it depends that how it has been, were the resilient factors associated with that, and what is the percentage of damage that took place in that particular region. Apart from that, major man-made disaster, splitting of fire, epidemic, COVID is an example of that, deforestation in North America. Every year you can witness in Australia also recently that forest fire which took place, that is an example. Pollution due to prawn cultivation, chemical pollution, waves, wars, these all are example of major man-made disaster. Coming to the minor man-made disaster, road, train accidents, any kind of riot, food poisoning, industrial disaster or environmental pollution. These are examples of minor man-made disaster. Now, I explained types of disaster to make you understand the basic concepts of disaster, because once I explained the types of disaster, one word which is very prominent in nature is risk. So, what is risk? How to define risk? Risk is a measure of expected losses due to a hazardous event of a particular magnitude occurring in a given area over a specific time period. Risk is a function of the probability of particular occurrences and the losses each would cause. The level of risk, that depends upon the nature of hazards, the vulnerability of the element which are affected and the economic value of those elements. In Myanmar and Thailand, recently what has happened, you can see that what kind of economic loss that country has undergone through. So, that is also example of risk. Now, again after that I will discuss about the vulnerability aspect. Now, what is vulnerability? It is defined as the extent to which a community, structure, service or geographic area is likely to be damaged or disrupted by the impact of a particular hazard on account of their nature, construction and proximity to hazardous terrain on a disaster prone area. Now, one basic example I will cite for Japan and other countries. In Thailand, in Myanmar, there are such areas where they do not construct a very concrete house. These are the houses which are slightly, like, these are made up of such material that even if the hazard is taking place, it can reduce the impact of it. Or even in Bangkok, if you might have seen a high rising building, but in these high rising buildings there are instruments which can indicate that a disaster, that a hazard or any kind of incident, natural incident is going to take place. So that is what is the definition of vulnerability, that how vulnerable is area, the less developed area where the communication is less, where the such infrastructure is less, that is more prone to disaster compared to those areas which are highly developed and can predict the disaster. So, the relationship between risk, hazard and vulnerability can be disaster risk is equal to hazard plus vulnerability. That means when we include hazard and vulnerability together, this is the basic thing which you need to understand. Vulnerability means, again I will emphasize upon the community structure, service, geographic area where they are residing and the impact of a particular hazard. This is called as a vulnerability. So, this is the extent of damage in a disaster that depends upon the impact, intensity, the characteristic of the phenomena and how people, environment and the infrastructure are affected by that phenomena. So, now after explaining all these things, let me explain broadly about different types of disasters. So, first I will start with the flood. What are the causes of flood? It is the rainfall that causes the sudden, and it is the quantity during the flood, the overflow of snow, or it can be because of the natural cyclone which is taking place. It also depends upon the clearing of agricultural increasing flood, that how this is impacting the agricultural area, the flood under that, if the crops are submerged and it's a great economic loss, it is also considered. So, building walls prevent spilling out of the flood water over the flood plains, diverting, how to combat with the flood which is taking place. Flood, it's like it's a huge amount of water that is being stored in an area and it is affecting the houses or the infrastructure or even agriculture field which is there. Now, the question is that how to combat with that. As I mentioned, that buildings, walls that prevent the spilling out of the flood water, that can be temporarily done. Then diverting excess water through channels or canals to areas like lake, river where water is not sufficient, it can be diverted to those areas. Optical and microwave data from the Indian remote sensing, nowadays they are using it to use, this is called as a flood management, in which they are already predicting that these areas are prone to flood, and if a huge amount of water suddenly comes because of the increase in the rainfall or because of the sudden melting of the snow in any particular area, then how to divert that particular amount of water to other tributaries or other, how to store that water further. Other thing is also flood forecast and flood warning that is given by the Central Water Commission. So, what is important here to understand is also the coordination of different government departments. Like as I mentioned, that nowadays Water Commission is giving that information, and Indian remote sensing is also showing that how there is a predictability of flood in that area, and then these concerned divisions or departments are taking a step further. Another example is of landslide. You can see in this particular figure the movement of earthly material like concurrent rock or mud or soil or debris from higher to lower region to gravitational pull. This is called landslide. What are the causes of landslide? It is the movement of heavy vehicle on unstable slopey region, different type of earthquakes or shock or vibrations that causes the landslide. What can be the effect of landslide? It can block the road. You might have seen most of the northeastern region, such as Darjeeling in Sikkim and Kalimpong. Often these landslides takes place. Even Uttarakhand is also very prone to landslide, and the reason behind that is because it is now being converted into a habitat area than to what it is required. So if the more number of people are residing in any hazard prone area, definitely that will convert into a disaster, because the vibrations will take place, because the seismic events will increase as that human population is creating a pressure on the land, a capacity of land beyond the land is capable of. So that is also one among the reason. The effect of landslide is that blocks roads, soil erosion also increases, because when landslide take place, lot of trees also it gets into that flow, and because of that it causes damage to houses, it causes damage to crops and livestock also. Now another hazard is earthquake. There are so many incidents, not only in India but worldwide. You can see the effect of earthquake that damage the settlement and transport system, that collapses house and their structure. The deformation of ground surface also takes place, and it is very permanent in nature. For example, tsunami. Most of the geography students, they get confused between earthquake. They think that tsunami is a different kind of hazard, but it's an earthquake which takes place inside the oceanic water, and because of that, that water intensity that is very high. So how to manage this earthquake? Constructing earthquake resistance building. As I mentioned, that in countries like Japan or Myanmar or Thailand, Bangkok, which are prone to earthquake, such resistant building are constructed, which can tolerate that vibration of the incoming waves. Seismic hazard map should also be given. It should be the resident of that area, the official of that area should also anticipate that what kind of intensity of earthquake is going to suffer. Another example is of drought, and India is again a country where we can refer any hazard which can convert into a disaster. So every year Gujarat, Rajasthan, these are the western states of India which are facing drought. What is drought? It's a normal recurring weather event that can vary in the intensity and duration by region of the country and even by location within a state. Drought occurs when there is a lower than average precipitation over a significant period of time, usually a season or more. And other causes of drought can be delay in the rainy season or timing of the rain in relation to the crop growth. Because if rain is not taking place, then the badly affected person is the farmer of that area. And as I mentioned, Gujarat and Rajasthan, still majority of the population is depending upon the primary sector, and they require the natural rainfall to be taken place in that area. So drought is a slow moving hazard even, so that psychological effect of the living through this type of disaster are more subtle and last longer than with other natural disaster. So drought is a best example where I can convince you that disasters are impacting people or resident of an area psychologically also, not only because it's a long term phenomena. If rainfall is not taking place in a region for longer duration, then it converts into a drought. Low water availability creates shortage in water supply that impact various activities of the environment. The impact is even greater as a human placed demands on water supply. Water is such a component of the nature for which we all depend for everything. Additionally, drought conditions increases the risk of other natural disaster such as wildlife and landslide also. Now, as I discussed different disaster events, I should also mention about tsunami. What is tsunami? It is a series of large water waves caused by the displacement of a large volume of a body of water, generally an ocean or a large scale earthquake, underwater explosion, landslide, glacier, claving, different type of meteorites that impact, and other disturbances above or below the water all have the potential to generate a tsunami. Tsunami don't resemble normal sea waves because their wavelength is far longer. Rather than appearing as a breaking wave, a tsunami may instead initially resemble a rapidly rising tide, are often referred to as a tidal wave. So, tsunami generally consists of a series of waves with periods ranging from minute to hour arriving in so called wave train. So, that is why in the beginning I said that what is the frequency of that particular, or what is the unpredictability of a hazard. Another disaster is cyclone. Cyclone refers to any inner spinning storm that rotates around a low pressure center. The low pressure center is also referred to as the eye of the storm. It can be tropical cyclone. A tropical cyclone is the storm system that is fueled by the heat released when the moist air rises and the water vapor it condenses. So, being a geography student, you must be knowing about the cyclone. So, now we can see that what are the destruction caused by the cyclone. The consequent of strong winds, these in general generate a storm, abnormal rise in sea level that occurs, heavy rains due to cyclone that causes river floods. Another example is also of heat waves. These are heat waves means a temperature rise, and because of the temperature rise, people, animal and plants suffer from the heat waves. Apart from death, more than people, even this is also like one example is of sunstroke, stroke and severe dehydration. These are minor examples of a natural disaster. Even cold wave is also is one among the example. The cold air masses transport only the little moisture, precipitation occurs, and the snow or sleet due to temperature below the freezing point, so that also causes. Another example is thunderstorm. Thunderstorm is a localized storm which is accompanied with lightning and thundering, and often brings heavy rainfall, hails, and that is why the typical thunderstorm is a 5 km in diameter and it lasts for average 30 minutes. So, this is also example of these all were different examples of disasters taking you back to our national scenario. Few examples at the end I will cite of major disasters that took place. In 1971, this cyclone in Odisha took place. These tidal waves killed more than 10,000 people there. In 1997, the earthquake which took place in Jabalpur that killed more than 100 people. In Uttarakhand, in Chamoli, it happened when it killed more than 100 people. In the same way, in 2001 in Bhuj in Gujarat, more than 10,000 dead occurred and heavy loss to infrastructure also took place. In 1991 in Assam, because of landslide, 300 people were killed and heavy losses to road and infrastructure took place. In 1998 in Uttarakhand, again 210 people were killed and villages were washed away completely. These were washed away. Because of flood in 1978 in northeastern India, 3,800 people were killed and this created heavy loss to the infrastructure. So, these were the different examples of making you understand how different types of disaster are badly impacting the region of that area. With this lecture is coming to an end. Again, as I briefed in the beginning, that this lecture explained you definition of disaster, different concepts such as risk, vulnerability, hazards. This lecture explained you the types of disaster, natural and man-made, how it is causing, and what are the quantitative data that I showed you to convince you the impact of disaster. Thank you.